The silence inside Kingsley's, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, was heavy enough to stop every sound. Forks froze mid-air, conversations died, and every gaze locked onto the small boy with braces on his legs. 10-year-old Lucas Montgomery, son of billionaire Richard Montgomery, stood trembling, his metal support squeaking as he extended his hand toward Diana Johnson, the restaurant's only black waitress. The live piano had just begun a delicate melody, and his impulse to ask her for a dance shocked everyone around. "Sir, control your son," barked Manager Thornton, his voice cutting through the tension. "This isn't a dance hall. Employees are not here to entertain children." Richard Montgomery stiffened. It was the first time he had taken Lucas out since the car accident that left him partially paralyzed 2 years earlier. "Lucas, sit down," he ordered firmly. But Diana stood motionless, her gaze moving from the furious manager to the rigid billionaire to the boy, whose hand still hung in the air. In 5 years of serving tables, she had learned to make herself invisible, especially to men like Montgomery. But something in Lucas's eyes kept her rooted. Calmly, she untied her apron, placed it on a tray, and said, "I can't dance in an apron." Gasps spread as she took Lucas's hand. "What do you think you're doing?" Richard demanded. "I'm accepting an invitation," Diana answered. Lucas shuffled forward, his braces screeching. Diana did not rush him. Instead, she matched his halting rhythm. Around them, whispers rippled. "She'd be fired tomorrow," one woman murmured. But Richard's mind was elsewhere. A sudden memory of his late wife, Elizabeth, flashed before him, guiding Lucas through a clumsy waltz in their living room. "It's not about perfection, it's about connection," she had told him. Now, watching Diana follow Lucas's hesitant steps without correcting him, Richard saw something stir in his son's face. Fear melting into concentration, shame giving way to shy pride. For the first time since the accident, Lucas was leading. After 3 steps, Diana gently returned him to the table. "Thank you for asking me," she told him like an equal. Then she turned to leave. "Wait," Richard said, his voice softer than he intended. "What's your full name?" "Diana Johnson, sir." He nodded, pulling a card from his jacket. "My office, tomorrow, 10 a.m. The restaurant held its breath as Diana accepted it. Lucas, still smiling, asked, "Dad, why did you do that?" Richard had no answer. The next morning, the marble and glass lobby of Montgomery Tower glistened in the sunlight. Diana Johnson, dressed in her best navy skirt and white blouse, felt out of place among executives whose shoes cost more than her rent. At the desk, she announced herself, "Diana Johnson to see Mr. Montgomery." After a scrutinizing look, the receptionist directed her upstairs. Miss Winters, Richard's assistant, met her with clipped efficiency. "Mr. Montgomery is in a call." "This way." As they walked, Winters' voice dropped. "He had you fired, didn't he?" "That's how it works. Clients like him complain, and people like you lose your jobs." "People like me?" Diana asked, her smile edged with steel. "Employees who don't know their place. And where exactly is that?" Before Winters could answer, the call ended. Richard Montgomery was ready. His office stretched across half the floor, overlooking Manhattan like a kingdom. He turned from the glass, his face carefully composed. "Miss Johnson, please sit." The silence that followed was intentional, the silence of power. Diana recognized the tactic but refused to fill it. Finally, Richard asked, "Do you have a background?" "Excuse me?" "Education, college, bachelor's in child development." "Incomplete master's in special education," she replied steadily. Surprise flickered across his face. "And yet you wait tables?" "I work 3 jobs. The restaurant, a bookstore, and private tutoring when I can get students." He studied her, then opened a folder. "I researched you. Freedom Steps, a dance program for disabled children. Co-founded with your sister. Diana's posture straightened. Yes, it's closing for lack of funding. I didn't come here to ask for money, Mr. Montgomery. You invited me. Richard exhaled. I want you to work for me. Not as a waitress. As a therapeutic companion for Lucas, I have the best specialists in the country, but what you did yesterday, his words faltered. It was the first time I've seen him smile since the accident. It was just a dance, Diana said softly. That's exactly why I need you. I don't work for people who see my color or my class before my competence, she replied, rising. And your son deserves more than someone paid to pretend to care. She placed a card on his desk. Freedom Steps, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 4 p.m. If you want to bring him, the first class is free. And with that, she walked out. The following Wednesday, Zoe rushed to Diana at their small community center. There's a Bentley outside. Guess who's inside? Through the window, Diana saw Lucas in the back seat, his braces glinting. Richard sat at the wheel, rigid as stone. He won't come in, Zoe muttered. Men like him don't step into places like this. Don't underestimate a determined son, Diana answered. Sure enough, the door opened. Lucas climbed out carefully. Richard followed, awkward in his casual sweater, his wealth impossible to disguise. Inside, the warehouse was alive with color and sound. Children in wheelchairs spun joyfully. A boy with a prosthetic leg tapped out a rhythm. Hand-painted posters read your rhythm, your rules. It looks chaotic, Richard muttered. There is structure, Diana said. Just not the kind you recognize. She turned to Lucas. Would you like to join? Lucas hesitated, looking to his father. Richard's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Go on. As Lucas joined the group, Zoe sat beside Richard. First day is always the hardest. For parents, not kids. This isn't therapy, Richard argued. I hire the best specialists. And how's that working? Zoe asked gently. At that moment, an older woman entered. Elegant gray braids, cane tapping. Dr. Elaine Mercer, Zoe whispered. Retired neuroscientist from Harvard. Richard stiffened. I rejected your proposals 3 times. And yet here I am, Mercer said warmly. Freedom Steps is my research program, studying how autonomous movement rewires the brain. Richard turned to Diana. You knew who I was at the restaurant. From the moment you walked in, she admitted. Lucas chose to dance. I chose to follow. That's the essence of our method. Before Richard could respond, reporters arrived with cameras. Richard spun, furious. What is this? Part 2 of the plan, Diana said simply. Zoe handed him a newspaper. Revolutionary rehabilitation method shows promise. You used my son as a stunt? He hissed. No, I gave him space to show. What you refused to. See, she led him to a wall, covered with children's progress photos. One empty frame hung waiting. What's that? Our future center. 500 kids a year instead of 50. Richard's face darkened. You orchestrated all this. Diana didn't flinch. I saw an opportunity. And I took it. Suddenly Zoe rushed in. It's Lucas. They hurried back to the studio. In the center, silence reigned. Lucas had removed one brace and was balancing shakily. His father started forward, but Diana stopped him. Wait, watch. Lucas focused, took a deep breath, and to everyone's astonishment, managed one unassisted step. It was uneven, trembling, but entirely his. The room erupted. Children cheered, cameras flashed. Richard's throat tightened, his polished mask cracking. Tears glistened in his eyes. That's why Freedom Steps exists, Diana whispered. Not for perfect steps. For first steps. The reporters swarmed. Mr. Montgomery, Is it true your foundation rejected this program 3 times? Will you continue to oppose it? Richard froze. Before him lay 2 choices: retreat in pride, confirming his reputation as cold and calculating, or embrace the moment his son had created. For once, wealth could not dictate his next move. He looked at Lucas, radiant with pride. And then, to everyone's shock, Richard smiled. "You know what's hardest for someone like me?" he said loudly. "Admitting when we're wrong." A hush fell. Cameras clicked furiously. The Montgomery Foundation will fully fund Freedom Steps for the next 5 years, including building a permanent rehabilitation center based on Ms. Johnson's and Dr. Mercer's methodology. On one condition, he paused, eyes on Diana, that Ms. Johnson has complete autonomy. No corporate interference. The room exploded with applause. Zoe gasped, unable to hide her joy. Diana, though cautious, nodded. Reporters crowded Richard with more questions, but he barely heard them. His gaze remained on Lucas, who, for the first time in 2 years, had taken a step forward on his own and led his father into unfamiliar territory. 3 months later, bulldozers cleared ground for the Freedom Steps Rehabilitation Center. It wasn't the grandest Montgomery Foundation project, but it was the most radical. Every hallway, every studio was designed with direct input from children and their families. Diana was there almost daily, clipboard in hand. Lucas often accompanied her, bringing friends from the program. To everyone's surprise, Richard appeared often too, not as the distant tycoon, but as a father quietly learning. "I never thought I'd see you at planning meetings," Diana remarked one afternoon. "I never thought I'd be studying neuroplasticity at 50, Richard replied, rubbing tired eyes. Scientific journals marked with sticky notes littered his desk. "But here we are." She studied him curiously. "Is this public penance or do you truly care?" He hesitated. Lucas asked to have his second brace removed last week. His therapist said it was impossible for 2 years, and yet he's doing it. Diana smiled. "Because you listened when I said she was wrong." Richard nodded, almost humbled. Then his tone shifted. "Why won't you accept my apology?" "Because you never gave one. Funding our program isn't an apology. It's compensation." Richard was quiet for a long moment. Fair. 6 months later, the grand opening of Freedom Steps drew families, doctors, and media. In the vast new hall, children moved freely, supported by adaptive equipment designed from their feedback. Lucas, now with only one lightweight brace, performed a routine with 3 friends. His movements weren't perfect, but they were confident, his own. Richard stood back, resisting the urge to interfere. Diana joined him quietly. "He doesn't need you to hold him anymore," she said. "No," Richard agreed. "But he still needs me to be here." "There's a difference." He turned to her. "Thank you." "For what?" "For teaching me to follow." A year later, Freedom Steps expanded into 3 new cities. Hospitals began integrating Diana's methodology into pediatric rehabilitation. At an awards gala, she received national recognition for innovation in therapy. But she remained rooted in the Bronx Community Center where it all began. Lucas, now attending regular school, walked most days with only a light cane. He had become a youth ambassador for the program, giving speeches and encouraging children to find their own pace. His shy pride, from that first dance, had blossomed into confidence. Richard, once known solely as a ruthless financier, had changed in quieter ways. He still commanded boardrooms, but he no longer dismissed what he didn't understand. He listened more, especially to Lucas. Empire he once believed he controlled, alone was now shaped by his willingness to follow. At a press conference marking Freedom Steps' expansion, a reporter asked Richard what lesson he had learned through it all. Cameras flashed as he glanced at Lucas, who was helping a younger girl balance on her crutches. Pride once made me think leadership meant guiding others down my chosen path, Richard said slowly. But my son and Ms. Johnson taught me the truth. Real leadership begins when we have the courage to follow someone, showing us a better way. The room fell silent before applause thundered. Later that night, Diana sat in her small apartment, leafing through the old notebook she had once hidden under her bed, filled with sketches, ideas, and dreams for freedom steps. Now those pages were becoming reality. What began as a boy's trembling invitation to dance had grown into a movement, reshaping lives across the country. And for Richard Montgomery, a billionaire, used to buying solutions, the greatest lesson was one he could never purchase. That true power lies not in control, but in the humility to let others lead the way.